Today, we're going to talk about covenant. It's such a tremendously profound and important concept, and apart from which you can't really have a proper understanding of God and how we have a relationship with God, and why, particularly, the God of the Bible is singularly unique and important and true. Covenant is a key to seeing that the God of the Bible is the true God over all the other claims of God from all the other religion and secular worldview and ideologies. Okay, so I want to take you now to an important paragraph in the Westminster Confession of Faith. So here, let's bring that up. Okay, this is chapter 7, Westminster Confession of Faith, of God's covenant with man. And this first paragraph right here, which may seem very simple, it's unbelievably deep in terms of its theological insight. So let me read it. It says, the distance between God and the creature is so great that although reasonable creatures do owe obedience unto him as their creator, yet they could never have any fruition of him as their blessedness and reward. Here we go, blessedness and reward. But by some voluntary condescension on God's part, which he has been pleased to express by way of covenant. So let me unpack this a bit. The distance between God and the creature is so great that although reasonable creatures do owe obedience unto him as their creator. So let's just stop there. Distance between God and the creature doesn't mean a little furry animal. It means a created being. And so what is the distance between God and the creature? Well, it's pretty great because it's infinite. That's the distance. It's an infinite God, finite beings. Okay, so any creature, we're all creatures here, we are finite. He's infinite. The distance between us and him is infinitely great. Okay, so even though we are reasonable, this old language means reasoning. I think reasonable means reasoning here. Reasoning creatures, reasoning created beings, we should know because we can think. You know, a rock isn't a reasoning being, so a rock doesn't obey God by its will. There's no will, there's no mind to choose obedience to the creator. You know, a rock just kind of does what a rock does. All right. So we as a reasoning creature, we owe obedience to the creator, but we can't have could never have any fruition of him as our blessedness and reward unless there's some voluntary condescension on God's part. So if one is infinitely greater than you, how can you actually know that he is your blessedness and reward? That's the way the confession puts it. Unless he condescends. It doesn't, we have this kind of in 21st century American English, this idea of condescending can kind of have like a bad connotation. There's no bad connotation here. This is 17th century conceptuality. It just means he came down. Unless God is willing to come down to a lower level so that we can see him for who he is, and he offers himself to us at the level that, where he can reach us, then how can we have any real fruition of God as our blessedness and reward? That is a deep, real love relationship to know he's our hope, he's our riches, he's our joy. And so what is the means of this voluntary condescension on God's part? That is covenant. Covenant is the means. Okay? So so far, that's not too hard to understand. Let me just come out of this. That's not too hard to understand. And now let me take some time to unpack a little bit about why this is so important. Okay, first, what is a covenant? What's covenant? A covenant is binding promises from two parties under God. Ancient people who didn't necessarily believe in God, like the God of the Bible, they could still engage in covenant. But what was tremendously important is the two parties would be together, and they're making deep, solemn, binding promises. This is really important. It's binding promises under a transcendent authority. And so So under a transcendent authority, and then they would bind themselves to each other to offer blessings to each other. So both parties would say, I'll bless you in this way, you'll bless me in this way. I'll bless you in this way, you'll bless me. It sounds like a contract. No, but it's different than a contract. Because in the covenant, beyond simply blessings, there's also, and this is absolutely important to a covenant, there is also the incursion of curse. This is important. So there's two parties. They bind themselves under a transcendent authority in the normal view, that be God. So there's always three. It's kind of like a triangle. There's always three. So there's two parties. They bind themselves to each other to bless, as the promises are blessing. If they fail the blessings, they incur curse under the transcendent authority. The authority will curse them. So, in today's like contractual society, well, then that's not like a contract. It's a lot different than a contract. Because the way we typically think about a contract in kind of like modern day economics is there's the authority is the government. Well, the government isn't transcendent, doesn't transcend, reality. The government is still people. And then there's contracts, and then if you break, there's usually some kind of consequences. Okay, and you say, I promise this to you, I promise this to you, and then if you break the contract, there's consequences. But here is how it's so different, right? Two parties, let's say one of the parties has more power or is richer than the other party, and let's say this party is connected to the government. This party is the cousin of the king, or has a lot of money to buy off the judge, or has greater lawyers to defeat the other side. So if you have a civil lawsuit, they could buy off the jury, they could buy off the judge, so that this side could escape whatever negative consequences there are in the contract. Okay? Well, if that's the case, then they get to flout the contract. The contract, it becomes this kind of, it becomes a piece of robbery, a theft, of oppression, because one side has more power than the other, and now can just kind of nullify the promises that they owe the other party simply because they have that great power. Does that make sense? Now, I hope as soon as I put it this way, you're starting to understand why covenant matters. Because whenever there's two parties and they want to make deep promise to each other, what if there is a question mark? Hey, what if you back out? Human beings lie. Human beings change their mind. Human beings, it's a good deal today, but in like 5 years, it's not such a great deal. A guy goes, I love you. Will you marry me? You're so gorgeous. I'm so in love with you. That song that they sing, your face, I'm going to, I'll die for you and I'll love you forever and forever. And then 5 years later, it's like, well, I'm not feeling it anymore, babe, and then, he wants to trade her in for a younger model because now he's kind of quote unquote in love with somebody else. And this is just a classic way that people break what we would call a marriage contract. But marriages are never intended to be contractual fundamentally. They're intended to be covenantal. And so if one party has more power than the other, how can both sides have trust that both will be bound together to fulfill each other's portion of the relationship, to bless the other, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's difficult, even when they don't want to do it anymore? And so the way that what they would say is, I'll bind myself to you, and there's usually like a ceremony. It's ceremony is like it's a binding piece of honor and oath. The oath with a very visible ceremony to say that the transcendent authority above us, if I fail this, you could do something really bad to me. I incur curse to myself. That's the nature of covenant. And here, this is something really important I want to emphasize before I close out this, first video here on this. It's very important that the importance of the covenant is to obligate and bind the more powerful party. It is the more powerful party, because just as I told you, if the more powerful party can just manipulate the relationship, and then the weaker party has no recourse to say, hey, you covenanted yourself, you promised that you would bless, but now you're not doing it. Or, now in fact, you're just manipulating. So now the relationship no longer becomes a blessed union of two where they bless each other. Instead, now it becomes an oppression where they're using and crushing the weaker. So the covenant, it's really important that the covenant binds the more powerful party, the powerful party. In the ancient world, they would usually call the more powerful part the suzerain, and then the weaker party would be called the vassal. The suzerain and the vassal would covenant themselves under God or their gods or some transcendent being, and they, of course, they both believed in the power of this God. And if this God would say, if you fail this, then we'll either kill you, we'll kill all your family diseased, I mean, there'll be great horrible curse upon you. And then what will happen is whoever like failed the covenant, and then bad things start to happen on this side, they would lose respect, they would lose honor, they would lose legitimacy inside their own circles, because they would now know they're under the curse of the heavens, or the curse of God. This is the meaning of covenant. It's an old concept. And so how can two sides truly trust each other? And in the Bible, this is called when one fulfills their blessing obligations to their covenantal partner. You know what they call that? Love. That's what it's called. It's called covenantal love. It's not primarily about feelings. It's primarily as I will bless you the way I promised I will bless you. And I will now fulfill my side of that relationship that I engaged in and sealed myself to a binding promise that incurs curse upon myself under the heavens. And so within this, then we'll have love. But if I don't, then I have covenantally hated you. I've covenantally violated you. I've covenantally oppressed you. And now may I be cursed. That's the fundamental idea of covenant. And the most important, obvious example is marriage. But then it also happened between nations. Two nations would maybe fight or go to war with each other. Maybe they'd go to war and then they'd want to have a peace. But if one side wins and then just says there's only two choices, we can just either crush you and destroy you. Because what if they consistently want to get revenge? Get back. You guys are an oppressive power. We're gonna constantly have rebellions and revolts. No, what they would do is they would covenant. Or if they didn't want to go to war, it says, you know what? We're having a big dispute. Let's covenant. And so the leaders of both sides, but you're more powerful than us. What do we can't just take your word for it, because what if you lie, or your children or your grandchildren lie? No, we'll covenant for our whole people. We'll covenant and bind even our ancestors down in this under God. And then this is how even two people and nations can now be under covenantal love and unity and peace. So this is the tremendous concept of covenant, and covenant is at the heart of how God offers us a deep and profound relationship to us.